It is my pleasure now, though, to introduce now Senator Jim Molan. And like we said earlier, the conference was postponed a little bit just to fit in with Senator Molan's itinerary. So that's how much we regarded his attendance at our conference. But I'll just read a little bit that I've got on Senator Molan, and I hope I won't embarrass you too much, Senator. But Andrew James Molan, AODSC, born 11th of April 1950. He's an Australian politician and former Major General in the Australian Army. He's been a Senator for New South Wales since December 2017, representing the Liberal Party. During his military career, Jim Molan was Commanding Officer of the 6th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, Commander of the 1st Brigade, Commander of the 1st Division and its deployable Joint First Headquarters, and Commander of the Australian Defence College. In April 2004, he deployed for a year to Iraq to serve as Chief of Operations for the new headquarters multinational force in Iraq. He has been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross as well as the Legion of Merit by the US government. He retired from the Army in 2008 and later that year released his first book, Running the War in Iraq. Following his retirement from the Army, Jim Molan was appointed by the then Abbott government as Special Envoy for Operation Sovereign Borders. In 2016, Major General Molan successfully stood as a Liberal Party candidate for the Senate in New South Wales, and in December 2017 was duly elected to Parliament, replacing Fiona Nash. So it's with great pleasure that we welcome to the Canobolas Zone and to Orange in general, Senator Jim Molan.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jason and David, Andrew's invited me to come up here and speak to you on this occasion. You guys invited me to come and speak in particular to this occasion, and it's a great honour to be here. And my first instance of becoming mixed up with fire was when I had a house. My house was burnt down during the Ash Wednesday fires in South Australia, and following that, I was, as well as being an infantryman in the Army, I was a helicopter pilot, and each leave I used to work for a Victorian firm doing firebombing. Now, you can imagine how impressed my wife was with that, because she rarely saw me throughout the working year, and then as soon as the holidays started, I'd end up all over the place doing it. But I remember on one occasion in Central, it was just after the Canberra fires, I was sent to up to the Central Coast at some fire somewhere, because I was used to relieve the pilots when they got to their maximum period of time. And I was sitting back in one of the command centres down there near the coast, and I was absolutely fascinated by how the whole system was run. We kid ourselves in the military that we've got all the knowledge and all the experience and how fantastic we are. We do an okay job. But the kind of job that we do for 15 years. We've been in operations in Iraq and Afghanistan now for about 15 years. If we haven't got it cracked by now, it's an absolute joke. But you guys, you could be fighting a fire later this evening. It'll be a different fire in a different place with different crews. You've got this up there to help you. But I've got to say, the flexibility of what you do and who you do it with is absolutely mind-boggling as far as I'm concerned. So I sat back and I watched the command and control of this fairly significant fire. I was waiting, my aircraft was parked outside, and I was just sitting on my bum back behind the ladies who were running the whole show. And it was the thing that I loved about it was that, firstly, it was effective and efficient. Secondly, it was unbelievably Australian. It was run in a way that just kind of epitomised everything that we are. It was informal. It was run by true blue dinky dies, and it worked. And I've got to say that this is something that I've always valued about the RFS. I've done a lot of flying, a lot of firebombing. I got to a stage about 7 or 8 years ago where I decided that I was far too old to have the doors off the helicopters, to be trying to get a long line onto a single tree. And I took the very brave desire never to fly helicopters again, firebombing, because it is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. I remember after a bit of a break I had, the greatest problem I had was actually getting the fire bucket into that big blivet that you guys put out. The hole's about that wide. I spent about 10 or 15 minutes the first time through trying to get the bloody bucket into the hole. I finally cracked it and everything went okay from then on. But I thought to myself, Jim, you are getting too old. You leave it to the 19-year-olds, and that's what I did. So as a result of that, I'm actually still here. But David was talking about the fact that I gave evidence at the 2009 Royal Commission. That was a real surprise for the Victorian fires. That was a real surprise to me. I'd just come back from Iraq, and in Iraq, my job as Chief of Operations in Iraq, and I'll talk about it in a minute, my job as Chief of Operations in Iraq was to continually be an incident manager. All day, I ran what we called the current battle. In the military, you've got people who do future plannings for the future battle. They work about 2 weeks out and forward of 2 weeks. They produce a plan, they give it back to current operations, which is us. We implement the plan. So I ran today's fight. That's all it was. It was incident management. Well, the 2009 Royal Commission was going along, and the lawyer assisting the Commission rang up. He was a family friend, actually. He rang up and he said, listen, we need someone to come and talk about crisis management who's not a fiery. So I went down there and I wrote out something for the Commission, and that was an extraordinary event, that fire, and the reaction to it was extraordinary, and it deserved a Royal Commission because of the number of people that died. We had problems of command and control at the very top, but a lot of every other part of those couple of days actually worked, and they worked well. And what struck me about that was that, and I think Andrew kind of mentioned it before when he was talking before. He said it's run like a military operation, and I've got to say that indicates that Andrew has no idea what a military operation is really run like. And with all excuse me, and if I die coughing soon, I apologise. But the first fire, I'm a member of the ACT RFS, and I'm a member of the Geysers Creek Brigade, and I haven't been very active because my body is falling to bits. But the first decent fire I went to with that brigade, and I've done a basic fire course, so I just sit in the back and I do what I'm told. And the first fire I went to, a serious fire I went to, was a fire out to the east of Canberra, and they pulled together a strike force of about 20 or 30 vehicles. I was pretty impressed by that. I sat back and I just watched what was going on, and it was fascinating. For the fact that we had no idea exactly where the fire was. We knew it was down the road, but we had no idea. We knew people were fighting down there. We had no idea exactly where the fire. We didn't have the maps for the area, but I saw what you guys do on a daily basis, and that was fantastic. You get problems which come at you from every direction. You have a workforce that you know, and you handle them beautifully. We fought that fire, saved house after house after house all night. I did as I was told. I watched the captain of my brigade, who was the strike force commander, and I was just blown away by him. We had a meeting the next day, and he said, it was because being a general, I thought I actually knew something. And he said, we didn't know what we were doing. And mate, I said, you guys did fantastic. What they did on that night and what we did was what the military tries to do as well as you do it all the time. I became involved in the RFS, in the New South Wales RFS, because I was invited to make the videos that I think you were talking about, Jason, and it was great fun making those videos. And at that stage, your doctrine branch, I think, was using a lot of military terminology. I was very uncomfortable with the military terminology. I don't like our military terminology going anywhere else because it's not part of your culture. And I was very surprised that we were using so much military terminology. But the ideas were great. Systematising training is a great idea, but you've got to do it within your own culture. And I made some videos, so I'm interested to hear that they're still being used, and that's great. But I would never stand in front of you and tell you how to do anything, because I've seen what you do from the inside, and I am always impressed. If you saw... I ran the war in Iraq, and let me just talk about the war in Iraq for a little while. And I'll talk about the war in Iraq because it is very, very big, it's very, very complex, and I'm not trying to teach you anything because you guys know how to do your job. And the leadership that we have seen exercised today in front of you by Jason and by David and by others is beautiful leadership. Every time there's a chance to talk, it's a chance to lead, and we've seen leadership tonight. So I would never stand in front of you and say, I can teach you guys anything. But what I offer to you is something that may be of vaguely interest. It's been a long day, so you guys, it might be different, it might be of interest. My experience in Iraq was, as I said before, entirely crisis management. We had a country of 28 million people that wasn't just suffering from a fire, it was suffering from a large group of people within that country that was tearing it to bits. Whilst that was happening, of course, there were fires, there were floods, there were the normal things that any country goes on with. We had destroyed the government, therefore we ran the whole country for a long period of time. Now, I've never run a country before. I found that I was running the oil industry, I was running transportation industry and the electricity industry, and because we just managed to get rid of all the Sunnis who had been running it before. We had a bunch of Shias who were very low-level people. They had no idea how to run it, but we had 28 million people to which we had to get electricity. We had to pay for the war, so we had to push the oil out, and it was quite an extraordinary situation. And I had 2 weeks' notice to go to this war, so I was fat, dumb and happy in Canberra running a lovely job. And I got the word to go, so I went across and I found this problem, extraordinary problem. So we were doing all of that, and then we were fighting. We had 300,000 soldiers at the end of the year that I was there. From a standing start, we put together a force of 300,000 soldiers. Now, regardless of what you think of how we got into that war, I didn't have the choice of pulling everyone out because that would have been deeply immoral. Regardless of why we're there, we had to look after the Iraqi people, and we did our best to look after the Iraqi people. So 300,000 soldiers, and we had a ratio. We'd say to ourselves, if you look back in history for the last couple of hundred years, the successful counterinsurgencies that have been run throughout the world had a ratio of one counterinsurgent, that is a soldier or a policeman or a paramilitary person, for 20 people in the population. So the number of bad guys didn't matter. It was your presence among the population that was the critical ratio. And at no stage when I was there did we get over eight people. So we were 1/3 the number of troops that we needed, that history told us, that we needed to stabilise that country. And we wonder why we didn't win in the first 5 or 6 years that we were trying to do this. So 300,000 troops. As a very simple indicator, we had 32,000 amongst those 300,000 troops. We had 32,000 Humvees. You know, the Hummer equivalent of the Land Rover. We had 32,000 of these bloody things. We had 400 tanks. We had 600 infantry fighting vehicles, and we fought every day. About over 10,000 Iraqis were killed in the 1 year I was there, 90% of them by the bad guys, and we lost 900 of our American soldiers killed, 900 of them. Most Australians don't know the level of fighting and violence that has gone on in Iraq. This was a savage war. The Americans have suffered 4,500 casualties, 4,500 killed in the entire period of the war. In the year I was there, we only had 900 killed. This is the kind of disaster that is inflicted on a country, and it's been worse when the Islamic State were there. And of course, Syria is 5 or 10 times worse than that. And my job was quite amazing, actually. I found that I was Chief of Operations. I ran every part of the war for the American 4-star general, and that consisted of crisis management throughout the whole day. And when I first took up the job, I spent a period of time understudying the guy that was there before him. When I took up the job, I found that I had about 25 or 30 crises a day. And where the real breakthrough was that I started to recognise what were really crises. So I had this group of 20 American colonels that worked to me. I had a headquarters, in the operations headquarters, I had about 300 or 400 people working for me. We ran 2 12-hour shifts a day, and exactly like Jason was talking about, an operations centre was Saddam's ballroom. We called it the ballroom. I don't think he actually carried out balls there. He probably executed and tortured people there, but this is an enormous area. And the information would come flowing in, and we had 80 computer slots, each of which was manned by 1 or 2 people, that allowed us to touch every part of that country in a military or a commercial, military or a civic sense. So we knew we could get into the prisons, we knew we could get into what was remained of the judiciary, but we knew we could touch every part of the fighting force across the country. And that headquarters was set up over about 2 weeks. It wasn't a permanent headquarters, it was a joke to begin with, and we had to bash it into being and make it work. I found that we were doing this with tremendously dedicated young Americans. We had almost no Australians there, but a great bunch of young Americans. I had a bodyguard of 12 people and 4 armoured vehicles. And I used to travel all the time because part of my job, particularly around Baghdad, was to go out and travel around Baghdad and particularly reach the Iraqi stakeholders that we had to get onto our side. And it was a very interesting. It kind of gives a new sense to the fact that your trip to work in the morning is pretty good. But I got to say, we were attacked 15 times in the time I was there. And for a general, I mean, this is just not good for a general. You think you reach the stage where people aren't going to have a hack at you. But at least my job was, I was definitely responsible that when I was attacked, I had to run away. Cosgrave would have killed me if I'd stayed and fought. My bodyguard kept on, who were Australian SAS, kept on saying to me, "Sir, we've got to stay. We've got to stay. We can do these guys over." And I'd say, "No, Cosgrave will kill me if one of you guys gets hurt." So we had to run away. But the soldier on the street, 95% of the fighting was done by the Americans. The soldiers on the street used to fight what we called the 3-block war. And it was called that by an American theorist. And it was called a 3-block war because he looked at the current series of wars we've been involved in consisted of, if you looked at a city block, and we're in a city of 5 million people, if you looked at a city block, you'd find soldiers handing out humanitarian aid. If you looked over here, you'd find soldiers doing peacekeeping, keeping crowds apart. If you looked over here, you were in deep combat. And the irony was that the same group of soldiers would be doing humanitarian aid in the morning, they'd be doing peacekeeping at lunchtime, and they'd be deeply into combat by evening. And we fought some quite incredible battles. I was involved I was responsible as Chief of Operations at the highest level for all the shaping of the battlefield for the biggest battle we fought there, which was the Battle of Fallujah. We call it the Second Battle of Fallujah, but it was quite unbelievable in its violence. We finally found 6,000 insurgents who decided to fight us. And they said they'd stay and they'd fight, and we thought, no, they'll run away. So we manoeuvred all our forces around, took us a long time. It was the centre of all their bomb making, all their rest and recuperation, a big area that politically we weren't allowed to go in until a certain date. And finally, we assembled 13,000 troops and we went in. And over 6 weeks, we killed 3,000 of them. We lost about 150 of our own soldiers, mainly US Marines. But the savageness of the fighting in a city had to be seen to be believed. And this is why I'm so fascinated by people who think that the essence of the Iraq War was drones and satellites and moving digits through bandwidth. It wasn't. What we lacked then were infantrymen. We lacked people on the ground to live and work and fight amongst the people. And that's the nature of what's going on at the moment. But as well as that, I was also responsible for getting all the fuel into Baghdad. And of course, our enemies were determined that the people of Baghdad and every other major city they could find, the people of Baghdad were going to come to the conclusion that it was much better under Saddam. So they were going to cut the fuel off. And the way they did it, the 800... Iraq's a strange country. It's got more fuel than any of us, more oil than any of us know. It just can't refine any of it. So it sends the fuel out to Jordan or somewhere else and brings it back in. The petrol brings it back in. There's a lot of similarities in Iraq and the way they manage their fuel in the way Australia manages its transportation fuel, I'm telling you. But 800 trucks a day, fuel trucks, and that's not counting the military ones. We escorted our military ones up from Kuwait every day. 2,500 trucks we brought into the AO every single day. And we fought every day on the roads as they were ambushed. But 800 trucks, civilian trucks, came in from Jordan, from Turkey, from Saudi, to bring fuel into Baghdad. And they used to sell it at most exorbitant prices. The first thing the bad guys did was start attacking those trucks. And the truck drivers at a certain stage decided it wasn't worth it. So we solved that problem by paying them 5 times as much and giving them a bit of an escort. And it's a bit like the pictures we saw up there. Every time you thought you knew what was going on, you were surprised. And it's a continual incident management system that you've got to do. And I got to say that I found no system to do it apart from me physically being there as someone who gained experience, because I was losing a lot of my people every 3 or 4 months. Half the bloody organisation would disappear every 3 or 4 months because they were rotated out by the Americans. To equate that with what you do on a day-to-day basis is silly in a lot of respects. The beauty of your situation is that when in that first fire that I remember, in that first fire that I went to out at Bungendore from Canberra, we fought the fire all evening. We started about 8 o'clock seriously. We finished about 1 o'clock in the morning, and someone came in and relieved us. And we went home, by 2.5 hours later, I was probably back in bed. In the military, we would have pulled our soldiers out, given them 2 hours sleep, and then we would have been back into it again. But then our soldiers are all 19 years old. They're all young and fit. And the training that we are resourced to do would blow your mind. I've learned over time. I used to be very annoyed about the fact that we never had enough money to train in the military. When I was commander of the 1st Division, as Brett was saying, it was a division of 15,000 Australian soldiers back in Australia here. We used to shoot off $80 million worth of ammunition per year. And that was the basic level of training to make sure that division, and it was never battle ready, that division, but $80 million doesn't buy you much ammunition, believe it or not, when every artillery round will cost you over $1,000. And when your machine guns will fire at 1,000 rounds a minute, and if you buy your machine gun ammunition in Australia, it's going to cost you about 80 cents per round. If you buy it out of Singapore, it'll cost you 20 cents per round, but it's still a lot of bloody money. And the only way to train soldiers is to train them realistically. Per month in Iraq, we ran through $5 billion worth of cash per month in Iraq. American dollars. And the Americans got it from the Iraqi money that was in the US or selling Iraqi oil. But if you think that defence. You know, we spend $35 billion a year on defence in Australia, and the government, of which I'm a member, and Andrew's a member, has promised us $200 billion, the largest rearmament process in peacetime in Australia's history, because we are worried about the future. If you think that's a lot of money, try going to war. It is fabulously expensive. And Jason, I'm sure that once you deploy on these big things, the Section 44s or whatever you call them, I imagine you just throw money at it and make it work. And that's what you do in a war. So I guess I'll just run through a couple of things that I thought might be relevant to you, and then, if we've got time, people can define what they would like to talk about. The first thing I'd say is that the single most important activity is human leadership. Nothing beats human leadership. I don't care what the digits are telling us. I don't care how connected all our vehicles are. Dave, the captain of my brigade, is our local leader. Shane is your local leader. Is your top leader. The leadership of these organisations are keys to winning the resources to make the organisation work well, and they're key to running the fight on a day-to-day basis. You are essentially what this society needs, and you are so quintessentially Australian that it's mind-boggling. I've been retired now. I failed retirement 3 times. I'm in the middle of my 3rd failure of retirement. But I joined the RFS in the ACT because I live right on the border. When I got out of the army, and I did it fundamentally because I wanted to be part of an essentially. I miss the army. The army is a great organisation. I wanted to be part of a group of Australians that were doing something, and that's something you can never take for granted. And when I look around this room, I see you guys are exactly the same, because we are what we are, and you are what we need. And the way that you guys put together this organisation, the professionalism that you show in a quintessentially, we've got young thrusting majors that run our operations centres. You've got guys like this gentleman that was in the front seat here, who I couldn't get in a truck and out of a truck there for a while when I had a hip replacement. But they're the kind of people who run your operations centre, from what I can see, the regional operations centres. And they do it well. And that's what you need. So we can't teach you guys much at all in relation to doing this. Your job is so totally different from what we do that I wouldn't even try to make the suggestions. If you can draw any suggestions from what I say, then that's great. But the one thing that you should draw is a level of confidence about what you do, and don't come to the army and say, can you teach us anything? Because I don't think we can. And I'm always amazed when people who don't know anything about firefighting say, and there's a fire somewhere, and they say, why don't they call the army out? Yeah, we'll call the army out for trucks, or call the army out for communications or something if you like. But you guys fight fires better than we'll ever fight fires, because it is a specialist skill, and it requires. I wouldn't send my young soldiers out there in groups of 10. You don't do it, and the responsibility of your vehicle commanders is the safety of your people. You know the safety. So if a soldier wants to be a firefighter, let him join up and do it over the weekend. You have a different manpower source. We have, yesterday I was in Sydney, and my old battalion, which is the 6th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment, I was the CO of that battalion. We established a plaque at the Royal Australian Regiment monument, and I was asked to say some words, and I spoke about the basic infantry test. And the basic infantry test for young soldiers, an infantry battalion is about 800 people. It's got 30 officers, might have 100 or so non-commissioned officers, and the rest are bloody 19-year-olds. And, I look at my son, he's 26-year-old, and he flies aeroplanes for Virgin, and sometimes I shake my head in astonishment. But 19-year-olds need leadership. They need intimate leadership all the time. But what you get from a 19-year-old, you get great enthusiasm. You get great fitness. These guys are incredibly fitness. Our basic infantry fitness test for the 6th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment was that a light infantry soldier had to carry a 40-kilogram pack, 80 kilometres in 24 hours, and he had to be fit enough at the end to fight. Now, you guys don't need that. You guys don't need that. You need a basic level of fitness, and the beauty of your situation is that, you know, I must have been bloody 58 or 60 when I was at the first fire I went to, and I was getting a bit tired by 2 o'clock in the morning. But what you do with the people you've got is extraordinarily clever, as we've just seen from over there, and that's what we need. We of the older generation have an extraordinary amount to contribute to this country, an extraordinary amount, and in the Rural Fire Service I see it all the time. It's very interesting. You've got a local orientation, we've got an international orientation. Let's hope we never have to fight in Australia or close to Australia. The beauty of what our kind of overseas strategy is that if you can keep the bad guys away from this country for as long as possible, all those people who don't like us, who are lazy, who are on benefits, who wouldn't work at an iron lung, well, that's their right. You know, let them do that. And that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for people who may not appreciate what we do, who wouldn't join up, who wouldn't volunteer. That doesn't matter. We'll carry that. The older generation and you young guys will carry that, and I think that's great. The 2009 Royal Commission, to me that was really key and reinforced into the Victorian fires, was reinforced everything I'd ever learnt about leadership. Leadership in crisis situations, leadership in highly visible situations, and the knowledge and experience of the person who is at the top of the organisation is absolutely critical. You may have seen a lot of publicity in the last couple of days about standards being lowered in relation to women coming into the infantry and the army, and Xena, the warrior princess, and all of this kind of stuff over the last couple of days. And you may not have, you're not missing anything because none of it was true. But the basic reliance on leadership at each and every level, you just can't get away with. When I sat in the back of the truck and we suddenly found ourselves driving out to that first fire, I thought to myself, well, a whole bunch of people have been trying to kill me for a long time. I hope I don't get killed this evening by someone who doesn't know what they're doing. But they did know what they're doing. You know, the driver, the crew commander, the crew boss of our crew, knew exactly what he was doing. And he looked after us all that night. We put out fire after fire after fire, and he looked after us all that night, and that's what you do all the time. Sometimes at the top level it doesn't work out. I was fascinated, and I won't make any personal comment, but I was fascinated by the interaction of leadership at the top level of Victoria during that fire period. And if it's the evidence that I gave to the Royal Commission, I don't think they were capable of understanding that, and that's not an arrogant thing to say. But we have a view that if you don't know what's going on as the top commander, then get off your ass and find out. If you don't know what's going on, it's your obligation as the boss to find out what's going on. You can't sit back there and say, well, I don't know what's going on, so it must be good, because it invariably won't be good. And I have this philosophy that every time you think you know what's going on, you're going to get hurt. And in the various, I've been to 4 or 5 operations, and in each one of those operations, you could see the results of an error within hours in dead bodies. And it does focus the mind, I must admit. I spoke before about different resources. Compared to you good people, and I think there's 60,000 or something, Jason, have you? 74,000. That's an awful lot of people. I don't know what your budget is, but our budget is pretty bloody big. And sometimes I wonder if you guys shouldn't get more of our budget, but I'm not going to give it to you. But you do marvellous things. And 41,000 man-hours at $25 a man-hour is a pretty impressive figure, to say the least, particularly when I think of the Army Reserve, who are paid a good wage. Their employers are paid a good wage. They're paid a supplement to release someone to go off and do something. I think in South Australia they do a similar thing. So your volunteering and my volunteering as well is a real asset to this society, and of course we couldn't do it without the volunteers. We have something called a battle-worthy assessment, and organisations which are going to go to war are stringently assessed as to whether they work. We can afford to do that because we pull 1,000 people offline, and we give them task after task after task, and for a month we assess them. If they pass at the end, we say, OK, you can go to East Timor, you can go to the Middle East. If they don't pass, we sack the commander and do it again. You can do that, I guess, at the basic level, but the assessment of your fireworthiness, I guess you do it somehow. We do battle-worthiness the same way we do airworthiness for ships and airworthiness for aircraft and seaworthiness for ships. So they're the main things that I'd say to you. Leadership is everything. You guys do a great job, and I stand in absolute awe of what you do on a day-to-day basis. I'm very happy, David, to take any questions about anything that people might want to talk about.
Thank you, Jim. I'm sure there's some questions. Don't be shy.
I'm curious to know, and I may have missed something, and I don't follow wars in Iraq very often, is how come you were in charge of the Americans?
Very, very, very easy. Firstly, I wasn't in charge of anyone. As a staff officer, I don't command anyone.
All right.
But you have an American four-star general, and command is a legal term. He commands the military. As a staff officer, I take his authority and I apply it the way he wants it applied. The interesting thing about that is that, and you know, below the boss, I think we had 9 separate divisional formations, each of about 20 or 30,000 people, and each one had a general. Some from the, 1 from the Marines, 3 from the US Army, and the rest from strange places like Ukraine and places like that. And it's like everywhere, and Jason might identify with that. It's very rarely that a direct report to the boss will go in and say, "Boss, this is a bloody joke. You know, everything you're doing is wrong." So what they do is they go to the chief of operations and they say, "Listen, you know, you've got to tell the boss that this is a joke. Everything he's doing is wrong." And that worked like that. But I had extraordinary authority, but it wasn't my authority. It was the boss's authority.
With respect, they picked an Australian.
It was very, very simple. There are only 2 other nations in the world that could have done this, or 1 other nation in the world that could have done this, and that's the Brits. Only the Brits and the Australians have access to American intelligence at the rate that you need it to do that kind of war fighting. The Brits would not put someone in for a year. We were prepared to put me in for a year. The Brits wanted to put someone in for 6 months only. The Americans wanted to get a non-American face on the chief of operations job, and that was the only thing. That was the only reason. Any other points or questions? Yeah.
Senator, in your leadership roles, of all the things that you recognise about what you've done, can you just tell me 2 things? One that you know you've done really well, and one that you wouldn't do again. I think what excuse my cold. I think what I am very satisfied with that I do well in relation to leadership is the energy that I put into it. And I've always found that, and we change jobs about every 2 years. I think Shane's been there for about 6 or 7 years, hasn't he, doing that job? 10, is it? Is that right? God help us. And I've got to say that's good. That's good. We seem to rotate our chiefs of defence force through about 3 years, 6 at the absolute outside. But what I think I do well is the energy that I bring to a job. Now I'm getting older and older and older, and maybe that will deteriorate. But the energy and enthusiasm that I bring to a job. See, the Americans looked at me when I rocked up there. I had responsibility. This is bizarre. We have what's called a targeting board, and the targeting board consisted of me, an American colonel, and a lawyer, and we decided who we were going to kill. Now that's savage and it's nasty, but that's exactly what we did. We had special arrangements that we decided what the emphasis was in accordance with the boss's direction, who we were going to kill and how we were going to kill them. Particularly, we went after the leadership of the enemy. and the Americans had a chief of operations, an American Special Forces Major General, who'd had a nervous breakdown. He was totally risk averse. I fronted up, and the colonel in charge of the American Special Forces sent me an email which said, we just put up with this idiot for bloody the last 12 months. We've now got a coalition officer who's come in to take over the job, because I had to approve all of their actions. He said, we'll win this war despite you. Well, I thought, there's a challenge. This guy was challenging everything that I was supposed to do. If I backed off at that stage, all the Americans, they were dedicated to winning this war. They'd just been through 9/11, and the impact of 9/11 on the Americans was something we may not understand as much. But they saw that I was committed to their aim. That American colonel, after a period of time, it did involve me getting the 4-star general to come down and kick his ass for him. But that American colonel came over to my side totally. The guys who worked for me in the headquarters watched me for about a couple of weeks, and they finally figured out that I was on their side. I could do my job. They were all reservists. Just all of the 20 colonels that worked for me, and then it went down into the troops. Only 3 of them were full-time soldiers. And I'm a full-time soldier, so I had technical skills. They figured that I was working for them, and that was once they understood that, they fell in line. I worked for a year. At 20 hours a day. Maybe once every 2 weeks, we'd fight over a night, so I wouldn't get any sleep. And every night, during the night time, we did our portion of killing, and that is really, it really sucks the energy out of you. But I reckon good leaders have got boundless energy, and people feed off you. What I didn't do as well, I've got this philosophy that you should understand what you're good at and what you're bad at, and you never tell people what you're bad at, because I'd be really concerned if I said anything now. The Greens might find out about it, and then I'd be taken to bits. But I guess to make a general comment, I've spent a lot of my military career trying to change the army from the bottom up, and I failed entirely. The way change occurs, in my humble view, is it's got to come from the top down. You can kill yourself, and my daughter and my son-in-law in Victoria are fabulously enthusiastic CFA firefighters just north of Swan Hill, and they've got the normal politics within a shed. And they've changed sheds on one occasion because of those politics. That's the human factors. But you really, you just shake your head in astonishment that we don't have a good organisation, that those that work for us don't love us, that people can be selfish and not bring those people in. So I guess trying to change anything from the inside is very, very difficult. Most things work generally okay until there's a disaster. But for us Joe averages to try and change something upwards, I think, is very, very difficult. Any other points or questions? Yes.
So your new field is politics now.
Yeah.
So where do you think you'll go with that, and what do you think you can change in that?
I haven't got a presumption that I will change, that I'm going to come in and change the world. But I do have some things that I can make. I believe I can make a contribution on. I'm not God's answer to the Liberal Party, and or to the coalition. But what I can do is I can work very, very hard, because this country deserves guys like Andrew and myself to be successful and to do a good job. And yeah, we get shit put on us all the time, and that's life. It doesn't matter. But I've met people who work harder than politicians, but not many. And in the 6 months' experience that I've got, I'm at that stage where I think I know everything now, and that's dangerous. I've done everything in politics now once. I said that to another senator. I said, this is about day 3 when I'd been attacked by the Labor Party and the Greens. I said, I think I've done everything in this place once. And he said, no, you haven't. He said, you haven't been through a leadership spill. So what I'm very, very interested in is defence. I think I have a view that we are in the most uncertain period of time that this country has faced since the end of the Second World War. We could have the dumbest defence policies that you've ever seen on the face of this earth, and we have, and we could have them and no one would know because the Americans dominated the world. Now the Americans no longer dominate the world. And this government is realising that, and as I said before, $200 billion over the next 10 years. Let's hope the enemy waits until we've built everything we need. It's a long wait if we've got to wait for the submarines, of course.
Who is the enemy?
The enemy is uncertainty. I am not in the game of ever mentioning an enemy in a public discourse in any way, shape or form, because it is so dangerous. Because you don't want to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I have great... I spent 5 years as a military diplomat in Jakarta in the worst time of the relationship Australia has ever had with Indonesia. I have great faith in our diplomats. They do very, very good work, and they're very, very clever. Our biggest enemy is that we don't know who we're likely to fight. Therefore, there is an argument for not being prepared. And that's really as far as I take it. But I can still make quite legitimately, and the Prime Minister has asked me to come along and speak to him on this subject. And people listen to me. Whether they do anything, we'll wait and see. But, you know, politics is the most human of of activities. And I'm still learning. I'm learning the skills that a politician has got to have. For example, I've come to the conclusion that the old question about what's really good about taking an instant dislike to Doug Cameron? Saves time. You know, it can be a very, very nasty organisation, but you know, my father was a great supporter of the Labor Party. We didn't have the Greens when he was supporting the Labor Party, but he was a great Labor man all his life. And I'm a member of the Liberal Party, and we're in coalition with the Nats. And I really believe that it would be that we have come a long way, both at the state and at the federal level. I won't get political, but state and the federal level. Our experience of other forms of other parties in government is not good in our recent past. And I would never justify our existence by saying that we're better than the opposition. That doesn't prove much. But I reckon, you know, the last joint party meeting I went to, and I because of estimates has been on, I didn't go to the last one that Andrew spoke about. The last joint party round, we put something like about 15 bills through Parliament. People say, I read in the paper or I hear on the radio, you know, the government is paralysed by Barnaby Joyce. Well, that's not the case at all. The media is paralysed by Barnaby Joyce. We're doing the bloody job. So I find it fascinating. I'm sure that'll wear off after a while. But this is good work. It's got to be done, and I stand in awe of my colleagues who I reckon are doing a good job. We've just got to crack through and convince all of you people to vote for us. But there you are. Yeah.
Jim, there's a lot of concern in Western democracies about foreign interference.
Yeah.
Are you able to talk about what's going on in Australia?
I reckon I can to a certain extent, as much as I know. In estimates, we examined the Director General of ASIO last week, on the public record. He came out and he made the statement that that there has never been a greater number of foreign agents in this country ever. We are in an interesting time. The Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, at estimates, came out with the statement that the Western world in our part of the region wants to have a region with many centres of power. Whereas, she said, and I'm not saying this is me, a coward, I'm not saying quoting the Secretary, whereas, she said, the Chinese want only one centre of power. We've just put a bill at the end of last year, the Foreign Influence and Espionage Bill, where we will ban any covert use of influence by a foreign power in this country. Australians decide Australian political outcomes, and that's the basis of that. People who exercise influence, and that's why you have embassies in a country. They represent foreign countries and they try to influence us. And I did that when I was in Indonesia. And that's quite legitimate because we know that what they're doing. And when a foreign diplomat speaks to you, you know what he's talking about. He's not talking about your interest, he's talking about the foreign country's interest. If you're going to do it, you've got to be part of people. We've got to know. Unlike the Sam Dastyari incident, where unfortunately Senator Dastyari got himself into trouble, perhaps by taking advantage of Chinese influence. We've seen the last couple of days what I consider to be a very disturbing event, and that is the Australian National University rejecting a free gift of a centre for Western civilisation, whilst at the same time they take money from the Gulf, from Iran, to set up Islamic studies and Chinese studies Confucius centres in that university. There's something fundamentally wrong about that, I believe. And what this government has done is to legislate against it. The irony is the Americans have now taken that and they're bringing almost exactly the same legislation into them. We've got an individual has been appointed, and his title is the Coordinator of Anti-Foreign Incident. Is something like the Coordinator of Anti-Foreign Influence. I think that's something like that, Andrew. And that's great. He's the guy who will coordinate throughout government how we manage foreign influence coming into this country, buying our politicians, buying our universities, and perhaps buying our land. So that's all I can really say about it, because that's all I know about it. But I gave an interview this afternoon on 2GB, my favourite station, on exactly this subject. And Bob Carr was on a couple of hours before, because he is an advocate for the Chinese government. But at least we know he's an advocate. Therefore, if he says something, we can assess that on the basis that we know what he stands for. Any other points? Yeah.
Donald Trump, good, bad or ugly?
This is a personal view. Yes, he's all of that. The problem I have with Donald Trump is that we are not used to this kind of president. This guy is a new president, and we're not used to the way he operates. We don't know for a fact that the actions he has taken has caused the North Korean conference to go ahead. We've got to do this North Korean conference. I have said publicly on any number of occasions, I am totally convinced that if the North Koreans step over a mark, the Americans will destroy them. And that's 30 million people. So we are teetering in a very difficult situation. But to give him his due, he'll be talking to the North Koreans any day now in Singapore. In relation to the Middle East is an appalling situation. We see what the Israelis and one group of Palestinians are doing on the Gazan border, ostensibly because Trump moved their embassy to Jerusalem, but not really. It's because Hamas wants to dominate all Palestinians. He's certainly in an interesting situation with Russia. In my view, Russia is the real unknown. Russia is under Putin is a very dangerous area, and we're not too sure where he stands on that. But I know exactly where his national security team stands, and that is either in practicality or ideology. They will confront Russia wherever they can. I think he's been good in Syria, but there's no answer to Syria. You know, we can drop bombs on airports and we can missile chemical warfare facilities. It's not going to solve anything. The poor Syrians are going to be torn to bits for years. Assad has won the war there, and he will search out everyone who opposed him and kill them. Apart from the fact he's driven 5 million people overseas and killed 500,000 of them. And Russians are behind that. Iran's behind him. That's what Trump faces on a day-to-day basis. Apart from the fact that he's, Stormy, whatever her bloody name is trying to take him to court. The special investigator is trying to take him to court. So God knows where the brain cells are left to manage the international events. Well, I think we just got to wait to see how he goes. But what I do say, and I probably should finish on this basis, what I do say is that if we expect, as we have for the last 70-something years, if we expect the Americans to be able to come to our aid in the future, we're kidding ourselves. They don't have the capacity to come to all their allies' aid the way they used to be able to. And I've written opinion pieces in the Oz listing the problems that they tell the world they've got, and they're enormous, absolutely enormous. So we face it. Now, this is why we need good government, and I won't get political about it, but why we need good government is that we are facing challenge after challenge after challenge in the future, whether it's a financial challenge coming in, something wrong with China or China giving us the boot, or whether it's a military challenge. It doesn't have to involve us. Or whether it's a kind of a resilience challenge that we don't have enough fuel in this country to survive a crisis. All of those things come together, and it's up to us to act. We're a smart country, we've just got to prove it. Just
I just one more, I suppose, to finish off on this flavour.
Yeah.
So, in that same vein, there's something going on across the globe, more broadly within society. So, and some might say you saw the three horsemen. You've got Trump, Brexit, and until more recently the Hanson movement.
Yeah.
Proliferation of one-term governments across both states and potentially federal. Some might say it is a view of anti-establishment, and the people sort of saying that we've had enough. What's your, I suppose, personal view to that? Because that we're seeing that world over, but also starting to have an influence now in the Australian context as well, which adds to the uncertainty.
We certainly are, and we're seeing that manifest in the Senate, if nowhere else. But I'm not, excuse me, I'm not overly worried about it, because if I went back to the 1920s, I'd see worse. And we survived that. We went into World War II, of course, which is a bit ugly, but we survived that. The people who said, the Harvard graduates who saw the First World War and said they would never join the military or fight for the war, supposedly they've won the Battle of Britain. I have confidence, and where I saw this really, I've been cynical about government for so long, it's not funny, because most of the directions I received from government weren't worth even looking at. Where my faith in government was restored was in Operation Sovereign Borders, that is, controlling our borders. For the first time in my life, I saw a government which knew what it was doing. It had a policy. It invited people to come in and write the strategy for that policy. We launched that strategy politically, won the election, and then we made it work. And to me, regardless of the Hansons of the world or the Greens or the Labor Party, which doesn't believe in border control despite what they say, I saw an Australian government with an interest that was deeply important to it make things work and do it brilliantly. And that's what we've got to do about energy. That's what we've got to do about energy. And I believe, and I know it's really contentious to say this, and I was on Q&A a couple of weeks ago, and I was looking for a chance to say it, but I didn't get it. We have the nub of a good energy policy. We've just got to make it work. And that good energy policy is one where our bills are cheaper and the lights stay on. And we were talking about that at lunch today. And that's our challenge. That's our government's. That's the coalition's challenge. And we've got a chance of making that work. But I have no answer to that, to what's going on in the world. But I hope that I can do something about that, a little bit about that.
Very good.
Go, mate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Very enjoyable, very informative. Strikes home with a lot of messages for me particularly, because I suppose Brett would agree, maybe you and I got a few similar personality traits with our energy and what we like to do. I'll try and protect my team with not coming up with any more what say moments for a while. I gave them the undertaking, was it yesterday, day before yesterday, that we'll have this year as a bit of a stabilising, treading water, consolidating type year. And Brett got the phone out to record it. Anyway, look, thank you all for participating in our conference today. Hope you found it enjoyable. It's really good to be able to report to you all on a good year that we've had, successful in operation, successful in building relationships further with our volunteers. Thank you, Jason, for coming and representing the Commissioner today. Thank you, Jim, again for coming. It's been really great, and thank you for all for participating, and we look forward to repeating this process again next year. And have a safe trip home, and thank you for coming.
Well done.
Please give my regards to Shane.